roads and bridges, improvements to locks and dams, rail upgrades, and expansion of broadband. Are there measures beyond the Farm Bill that Congress could consider to address these needs?
Absolutely. In fact, the Farm Bill, and I know your question is beyond it, includes grant money for all kinds of broadband projects which would be applicable to greater Minnesota. But that part aside, roads, bridges, ports, there is a major infrastructure bill that's being moved along. It's run into some issues because of FAA renewal. There was a complete reform in how we direct our planes in the airspace, which slowed it down. There was disagreement amongst Republicans and Democrats on that reform. I do not agree with the current proposal that hasn't really been rolled out yet, but there's an idea of a public-private partnership which is being promoted as you sell assets and the public entity then will work with the private company to run those public assets. I don't agree with that because that doesn't work in greater Minnesota, where you don't have the population, you may not have the assets. So I think it's more of a traditional ask. We need to restore more authority to the state to collect money and keep money and put that money to use where it's most important. And the federal government will have a role, but it should be fulfilling its role and its promises when it comes to supporting infrastructure improvements.
All right, Mr. Emmer, thank you very much. Mr. Todd.
Yes, we absolutely need to invest in more infrastructure, and it needs to be well beyond just what's in this Farm Bill. I'm glad that there is a law to expand broadband internet because that is something that our rural communities are in desperate need of. It's become downright necessary in this day and age to have access to internet. But I do worry. We're in Minnesota where we have one of the best infrastructure programs of any state, and yet we still have bridges that collapse. We have not been investing as a country in infrastructure in the way that we need to, and it almost feels sometimes that once we finished our interstate highway project in the 90s, the maintenance ended. And we need to make sure that we have proper maintenance and that we are expanding because we are an ever-growing country and we have ever-growing needs.
Thank you, Mr. Todd. Mr. Peterson.
As Tom said, we do have rural development title in the Farm Bill, and it does put money into some of the infrastructure. And we've been trying to tighten that up because a lot of that broadband money has gone to overbuild existing systems, and we're trying to stop that. In the other areas, the problem is resources. We have not been able to come up with a way that people can agree on how to raise the money to fix the roads, to fix the locks and dams, fix the bridges, and so forth. It absolutely needs to be done. The railroads, anybody who's been out on the roads knows that it needs to be done, but we cannot get a consensus on how to do this. We now have gone back to trillion-dollar deficits, which is not going to make it any easier to get this done. So I don't know, if I have the complete solution, but, I'm willing to consider raising the gas tax if it's dedicated to roads, and that's the way to get some of the money. Republicans are not going to go there, I understand that, so we'll have to try to figure out some way to try to make this happen.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Hughes.
I support increasing infrastructure funding and effort because there's a great need out there. I've talked to farmers and ag producers and manufacturers all over the district, and it's definitely there. There's a couple of ideas. First of all, I would never support raising a gas tax. Our problem at the federal level isn't a lack of revenue, it's a matter of spending. We're spending a lot of money on things that are not constitutional and things that are wasteful. Rather than increasing the price at the pump for our citizens, how about we cut back in some of the U.S. departments in the discretionary part of the pie? I could rattle off a bunch of departments where we could do a 10% cut in their incomes, and that would pay for it. So I would not support a gas tax. But we need to pay attention to that. And then the other part of the equation is the state of Minnesota, the legislature, and the government there needs to get their act together. They're spending $150 million per mile on light rail when what they ought to do is fix our bridges and roads out here in greater Minnesota. And so as a member of Congress, I will encourage the legislature of Minnesota to do the right thing, and hopefully we'll have a Republican governor there soon.
Thank you, Mr. Hughes. Jerry.
Mr. Hagedorn, your turn to go first. As a member of Congress, would you support enhancing federal spending to support food and agricultural